Welcome to the Community Center, home of the original Chappaqua Library over there, and its addition in 1952 here. And before that, I think it was when it was the side yard of Horace Greeley's summer home. This is where the playhouse was. Anyhow, I hope we have a pleasant program for you today. We titled it Growing Up in Newcastle, mainly, I must admit, in Chappaqua, of people who are all graduates of Horace Greeley, ranging from 1955 to 1972.
83.
Yeah. And the first of them probably needs no introduction. It's Don DuPont, Mr. Music. And he is a man of many skills and talents, a professional musician, a virtuoso trombone player, educator of generations of Chappaqua School District teachers, and he has one remarkable talent. He can walk down King Street backwards without falling flat. Don, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
I have some notes to say.
Maybe give him the microphone.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I moved into Chappaqua in 1947. We moved into Dodge Farms. I don't know why we left Clinton, Connecticut, a small little school, and I said, where are we going? And we're going to go to Chappaqua. I said, what does Chappaqua mean? And the only reason I asked that question, it was a Monday I had to go to school in the middle of my 5th grade. Mrs. Moore was my teacher. So Dad and Mom said, and my sister Lorraine said, we have to find someplace to eat. So we went to the Twin Diner. Mr. Viscomi had a diner right in Chappaqua. And one of the comments I made to Mr. Viscomi was, what does Chappaqua mean? And I think he said edible root, but I think it's changed several times. And what was remarkable about Chappaqua at that time, someone could be brought into the town and have everything fulfilled in his or her shopping. The old colony shop. You had to go to Squire's if you were a boy. You had to get Squire's pants. If your shoes were messed up, you had to go to Car Santo. Cadman's. Well, I have written down here. Nicolaus's, Mr. Cooperschmidt, Greeley Hardware. All those stores were in Chappaqua. Even the police knew the kids because the school was so small. So I came into Horace Greeley, I guess it was a Monday or Tuesday, and Mr. Harrington found out I came in, and I was new, and he came to me and said, do you play an instrument? And I said, yes, I play the trombone. And he said, well, how long have you been playing? I said, you're only in 5th grade. I said, I started in 2nd grade up in Clinton. My dad was a trombone player, and I had a trombone in my crib, I think. Anyway, when we moved to Chappaqua, Mr. Harrington was very happy to have another trombone player. But there was also a lot of music in Chappaqua those days. It was the orchestra. Boris Kutzin started it. My dad, Roland DuPont, played in it. The late Morty Ross played violin in it. So it was just filled. And we also had in Horace Greeley the Dad's Band. Dad's Band meant there were dads and moms. I don't know if we had any moms at that time that played, but they were welcome. And there was Jimmy Layden. It was several other, Gus Yeager on piano, Lee Hufford on tenor saxophone, my dad on trombone, and they play for parties or in Horace Greeley. So that is my beginning stage, and then of course my education took me from Chappaqua, from Horace Greeley to Oberlin Conservatory of Music, and then Columbia Teachers College. And at that particular time I was working with the road bands. I was working with the Glenn Miller Band, with the Tommy Dorsey Band, with the Guy Lombardo Band. It was kind of a corny music, but it was a beautiful tour. It brings me, and then I did Radio City Music Hall as a trombone player, and then with my dad, we were with his trombones with the Ed Sullivan Show. So one time I was with the band Gallimordo at the Coconut Grove in California. Jane Russell was throwing a big party for all the actors and actresses. So here I am sitting in this band that everybody's about 50 years older than I was anyway, the Gallimordo Orchestra, and everybody's walking in, John Wayne, Lester Williams, Mickey Rooney, the whole crowd. And that afternoon, after the show, I got a phone call from my dad. He said, "The Army wants you." I said, "Oh." So I got home and we read in the paper that there was an opening in the President's Band for trombone in Washington. So I had a Volkswagen and I called first, made an appointment to bring my trombone and play. So I drove about 5 hours, pulled in, and some colonel came over and asked me to play the trombone, and I played it, and he gave me some sight reading, and he said, "We'll let you know." So about a week later, I get a phone call and said, "Well, up your draft, you're in the Army Band in Washington." So I spent 3 years there with Eddie Fisher as the singer, and Edie Gourmet's husband, Steve Lawrence, was also a singer, and we traveled representing, and then the White House all the time with Eisenhower. So that was my career. After we got down, finished with that, the Army, I landed a job, of course, that I loved, with the Ed Sullivan Show, and my dad and I both played together. There was an afternoon, Saturday afternoon phone call with a page boy saying, "Telephone call for Mr. DuPont." And I went to my father and I said, "Dad, it has to be you. I mean, no one knows me down here." He said, "No, get the phone." It was Dick Oliver, the band director at Bell School. The trombone, the teacher that was teaching 4th and 5th grade at Grafflin School, and Roaring Brook got a calling. He's a bishop now, so you know who was calling. And he said, "If you want the job, here's your chance to go meet Mrs. Thrasher and Mr. Haig at the respective schools." So I came home and told my mother, my wife, that I was going to go try to get a job in Chappaqua. I met Mrs. Thrasher, and she listened to my thoughts about she should hire me and not even put an ad in the paper because I'm here. She said, "Fine, we'll try you out." And I did the same thing with Bob Haig. But I had to go to Dr. Cowan, the superintendent of schools, and he was a lover of the big bands. We talked about the Buddy Marler Band, the Glenn Miller Band, the bands I played with. And finally he said, "Oh, by the way, you're hired." That's how quickly it came. I wrote some other things here. When I got Chappaqua, one of the important goals of my playing there for 38 years was to bring parents involved in music, since Chappaqua was such a love of musicians. And my spring concerts, I would put a note out to all parents that once played an instrument or currently play an instrument to join my band for the concert. We had Vanessa Williams one time playing French horn. My dad played trombone. We had Drew Wilburn playing trumpet, who still plays today in my big band, and many times it's run through the recreation, the Don DuPont Big Band. And my daughter Michelle sings in the, she's a second grade teacher, first grade teacher at Yorktown. And where was I talking about? Oh, the big band. So then I got finished and I was asked to have a Memorial Day parade. And you heard about that. I was faced with 200 kids in front of me, and I made the mistake of saying, "If you get tired carrying the bass drum, raise your hand and I'll help you out." Well, I'm walking like this down King Street, trying to play the bass drum and keep it going. There isn't very much more except my big band I love, also to keep the name DuPont alive in Chappaqua, starting with my dad coming to me, and my son now is presently teaching at Roaring Brook, music, vocal and instrumental. And my daughter teaches first grade and sings every morning to her kids, because they both sing pop. But they never heard of Ella Fitzgerald, so when I had my big band playing and they wanted to sing a tisket, a tasket, Michelle says, "How does that go? A tisket, a tasket." And now that's what we do, and that keeps me going. And I have some students still. My wife's not well, so I'm really coming home constantly. But I wanted to thank you for asking me to come. think everything. Yeah, that's it. Oh, I forgot one thing.
Go ahead.
I always wanted to be a band director, a big band director. And one time, Lou Shuby, the contractor at CBS, said, Don, Mrs. Dorsey is looking for a trombone player that wants to start the band again with Frank Sinatra Jr. And she heard about your trombone playing. Would you go and play for her? So we contacted Mrs. Dorsey, and I went to the musical grill, and I played Getting Sentimental Over You, which is Tommy Dorsey's theme song. And Mrs. Dorsey said, you're hired. Are you married? I said, yes, my wife's pregnant with my first child. Don't take the job. I ended up in a divorce. So every once in a while, when we have a concert, my son and my daughter say, Donnie will say, Dad, I'm sorry I've messed up your career. I've offered to take Don down to Kensico Cemetery to see the grave of Tommy Dorsey, which is up on a hill in Kensico. And there's the epitaph of Tommy Dorsey, the sentimental gentleman. And there's a picture of a trombone, and at the base are the opening bars of Getting Sentimental Over You. All right, next is Fran Davidson, who is fourth generation. Her great-grandfather was John Isaac DeVoe Bristol, and his son-in-law was Albert Turner, and they, I think, owned half of Newcastle at one point. They came at the beginning of the century and bought up old, worn-out farms and estates, and were our pioneer developers. Then her own father, Bain Turner, from whom she inherits her red hair, and his brother Ross continued the tradition. And anyway, she's been here. She is one of the two people who were born here. I'm sure I've shared with most of you. Most of us weren't born here, but she was not quite. Oh, that's right. You were born in Barbados or Trinidad. But anyway, moved here before she actually went to school.
Before I could walk.
Before you could walk. Very, very, very early. Absolutely. And without further ado, this is Fran Davidson.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Growing up in Chappaqua in the 50s and 60s, a gift that keeps on giving. And I'm not a speaker, I'm a reader, so I'm reading this. What are the chances of a guy from Chappaqua meeting and marrying a girl living in Barbados in the 1940s? My siblings and I would probably not exist if my Uncle Ross hadn't talked my dad into leaving Columbia in 1942 and joining him in Trinidad, where civilian engineers were desperately needed for the war effort. Now, Trinidad was a vital deep water port, and it was a third world country. It needed paved roads, airfields, housing, everything. So they started in Trinidad, and they moved to Barbados, where Dad met and married my mom, and he joined the Seabees. I was born in Trinidad just weeks before they were sent back stateside. After we stayed in San Diego for a while, he was sent on to the Philippines to await the invasion of Japan. You all know the story. Truman dropped the bomb, and they didn't invade Japan. Dad got back. The family land holdings that Grace spoke about were quite impossible to sell as they stood. Roads, electricity, water, etc. were all needed. So Dad immediately started developing Poncho Road first and then Oak Hill Road. By 1950, those mid-century neighborhoods were formed. Early on, life revolved, or my life revolved, around family, school, and the good people on Oak Hill Road. My dad claimed to have handpicked them, some of his friends from childhood. Many were professionals moving up from the city, making our next-door neighbor a doctor. and with my exuberant younger brother and sister, medical help was often necessary. All my dad's picks were the most decent, caring people, always full of fun. My brother was a polio pioneer. He was one of those second graders who got the live vaccine and not the placebo. And the vaccines that those parents agreed to let their second graders have because they trusted Jonas Salk and the government wiped out polio back then. We kids were always outside, all the time, playing games we organized ourselves with the neighborhood children of a whole spectrum of ages. Every kid had a bicycle. The most important feat to master was going all the way down Oak Hill Road, no hands. We had the absolute best sleigh riding. Dad would go out from the little ranch house he built us with a bottle of scotch and 2 shot glasses for the snowplow drivers, and he'd ask them to raise the plow just a bit, leaving just the right amount of snow for sledding. The kids would slide all day, and our parents would put us to bed, and then they went out and rode their toboggans and sleds at night. And we used to lie in bed hearing them laugh. And I'll tell you, it first was annoying, but then it was kind of cool that your parents were outside having a good time. I babysat for most everyone on the hill, starting when I was 11 years old, for 40 cents an hour and time and a half after midnight. My folks co-chaired the roast beef dinner after the Strawberry Festival at St. Mary's Church, and fun always erupted in some form after the auction, and at the auction after the dinner. Every year it would come down to who was going to take home the camel saddle. It kept getting redonated year after year after year, and who knows how much money that camel saddle actually made for the church. I begged my parents for a horse from the time I was 4. I once overheard my dad tell Mom kind of humorously, "That damn kid must think we live in Bedford." When I was 9, Queenie, a beautiful 18-year-old chestnut mare, complete with saddle, bridle, halter, blanket, and brushes, came into our lives at the astounding price, even back then, of $75. Dad cajoled a local builder into selling him a dismantled construction shack for $25, and he and some of the male neighbors crafted a custom mini barn with a classic sliding door. He set up on Saturday morning to fetch Queenie from the horse stable next to the Mount Kisco Country Club clubhouse. A wonderful old Irishman, straight out of Central Casting, took care of the horses people boarded there and gave riding lessons. He patiently taught me to ride every day for 2 weeks. I can still hear that crow. "Heels down, back straight, lassie." Dad rode Queenie from there to Oak Hill Road, where the entire neighborhood eagerly awaited. It was a party atmosphere, complete with live music. All the dads who played instruments had assembled in the Pender's lawn across the street. A trumpet, a trombone, a clarinet, keyboard, snare drums, and several hot mamas with tambourines. And some guy playing a giant woodblock that sounded exactly like a horse trotting. My brother and the other scouts on their bicycles alerted us, "Here they come." Dad and Queenie were exhausted and slumping a bit as they came up the road, but as soon as they heard that music, they perked up and trotted into the driveway with that woodblock guy and company keeping time. A blacksmith showed up the very next day in a battered old van with a double hibachi as a forge. Every kid in the neighborhood was back again, watching the process, totally fascinated by his skill. Explaining as he went along, he filed her hooves down, heated the shoes to a glowing red, hammered them to fit, and thrust them into something called quenching liquid. I did a fast Google on that, and that's to bring the integrity of the shoe after it's being worn back. Before nailing them into place, he took the impression of each shoe so that the next time he came to visit, he'd have them all made. And he made many visits. How many people allow their kid to go off wherever on an 1,800-pound horse? I credit that experience for fostering my independence and confidence to solve problems on the fly. Queenie was truly the neighborhood mascot. Every kid rode her. The doctor's kid always called up and said, could he borrow her? All by himself. If we accidentally left the gate open, someone would call in the morning to say, Queenie's enjoying my grass. We'd We'd all explore the woods and meadows that eventually became Chappaqua Swim and Tennis atop Queenie. Setting up jumps with rocks and tree branches, I pretended to be Elizabeth Taylor at National Builder. My BFF since 4th grade, Penny, claims she still has flashbacks of riding double-line Queenie bareback. We would come here, right to this building, which was the old library, and we would get every Walter Farley Black Stallion book we could come up with and do our research on everything horses. Riding with my friends across town near Sutton's farm on Whittlewell Road, I would sometimes buy corn from Mr. Sutton on my way home. 1 dozen ears, $1. With the property sold in the swim club going up Queenie 3 years on the downside of 20, I took my last ride on her as we put her out to pasture, riding her over to the estate of a friend of my dad's, just down the road from what is now the Seven Bridges School. He welcomed her into the menagerie of animals he had. He said to keep his donkeys company. We visited her often. I remember dear Mr. Cadman and our neighbor over on Elizabeth Street, who owned the pharmacy. A phone on his counter told every kid in town that they could call their parents to come home to pick them up. I wonder how many times he heard those words. Hi, Mr. Cadman, may I use your phone? Douglas Grafflin had the knack for choosing very special educators. One of his choices, who awoke my creativity, was our art teacher, Tony Uden. Back then she was Miss Pax. Decades later, I had the privilege of helping Tony with Historical Society exhibits. She was still as joyous and creative a person as I remembered. I also loved working with her husband Al on second grade tours of the Greeley house. And by the way, his mother, Ada Bell, turned out to be my Aunt Helen's best friend even before my father was born. And in 1973, she became my daughter's nursery school teacher. I got a job at the Old Colony Shop. Barbara and Alan Morelli were the best first employers anyone could hope for. While getting an education we didn't really appreciate till later, there were precious friendships formed, pep rallies, football games, sock hops, slumber parties, proms right there in the gym. No Tony Long Island venues for us. Prom day was spent decorating the gym with thousands of colored Kleenex flowers that we've been making for weeks at home. I think Kleenexes don't come in colors anymore. Finally, we were really seniors. The girls in our class were constantly being teased by the guys for being too goody-goody. So 3 of us devised a plan, not to paint or destroy anything, but to make a muumuu with ties on the side and dress that statue of Horace Greeley in orange and blue. I managed to borrow my dad's ladder without him knowing it. And off we took in his Plymouth station wagon. Well, it turns out Horace is a lot taller than he looks. So no luck getting it over his head. He had to wing it. We had to wing it over his shoulder, and the muumuu became a toga. When Jill was up on that pedestal of the statue trying to tie off the last things, a guy came out of his house down the street with his dog. 3 minutes earlier, all 3 of us had been up on that pedestal. Bonnie and I warned Jill and dove into the bushes when we saw him coming. She remained up on the pedestal, clutching Horace, slowly making her way around the old dude. And she later said to us, "You guys hide in the bushes and leave me up there making out with Horace." Luckily, it was pitch dark and the guy had no flashlight, but by some miracle, the dog didn't sense her and the guy apparently didn't see her or the ladder. Scared and skeptical, we grabbed that ladder and were out of there. Certain he was inside dialing up the police. Got back to Jill's house at midnight and her mom, in on the prank, was eager to how it went. Now, back then, we always called very politely all the parents by the, Mr. and Mrs. whoever. But they all had secret names. Jill's parents were Maggie and Big Al. Maggie was one of the cool moms. "Oh, you kids, why didn't you take a picture?" she said. "Go back," she said. I flatly refused to take my ladder-laden car anywhere near the scene of the crime again. So Maggie grabbed her camera and drove us back herself. My dad announced at dinner the next night, "Some fool put a dress on Horace Greeley last night." Not sure I fessed up then or later. Of course, the best part was showing off our triumph to those annoying varsity clubbers. It took 2 weeks, a steady stream of people checking Horace out in all his glory. And if it were present day, we'd have been trending. Finally, the town got around to getting that cherry picker truck over there and undressed horse. Our daughter and her friends duplicated the same prank in 1988. Alas, the cherry picker was on site in mere hours the next morning. Our little town had become more efficient, but clearly not as much fun. In retrospect, the 50s and early 60s, Chappaqua was the place with just the right recipe to put joy into coming of age. As Porky Pig used to say, that's all, folks. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Sandy Buetti, also a lifelong resident, Greeley graduate in 1966.
Nine.
69?
Yeah.
Sorry, got it.
No problem.
Member of a close-knit family that immigrated to Chappaqua at the turn of the century. And he'll speak in particular of school teachers who had a particularly strong influence on him. Sandy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I have to unthank Gray for inviting me here. And I see some of my dear friends, John Morehouse and Jim Novak, and of course Fran. I'm a member of the Chappaqua Rotary Club for the last 34 years, which I'm very proud of. There's Don Rohn, he's also past president of the Rotary Club. We meet once a week at the Kittle House if any of you are interested in attending meetings, and we're looking for new membership. We're rebuilding the club post-COVID, or during COVID. And oh, Zimbo, Peter Zimmerman, I didn't see you there on the other side. And Don, how are you? Don DuPont, Clint Smith. Okay. Okay, my grandparents emigrated to Newcastle in 1903, Serafino and Frank Buetti. Their uncle told them to go to Chappaqua, and they believed him. So they came straight here, and they worked on a bunch of estates here. There's plenty of work, and they did very well. They raised some kids here, but most notably, the people who worked here were my dad, Sam Buetti, and his brother, Anthony, who were the Buetti brothers. Dick Buetti, the Greeley barber, and Nick Buetti, who's the Greeley tailor. So you can say that person woke up in the morning with their beautiful Buetti haircut, put their Buetti suit on, and walked out of their Buetti house and got on the train and went to work. And even though they might not, there's not too many Nick Buetti suits left, or there's Greeley barbershop is still. He started that in 1936 at the age of 16 years old. So anyhow, so they were from a small village of Solano Superiore in the township of Scilla in the province of Reggio Calabria, which is really located in a beautiful area, and the backdrop of it, you're looking at the Mediterranean, and behind you is the mountain ranges, which 85,000 acres of which was their backyard. It's now National Park, and it's a fertile plateau there, so they could survive. And my claim to fame today is I always introduce myself as Teresa's husband. My wife Teresa, children's librarian, Chappaqua Library, where the children's room staff conduct nearly 1,000 quality programs for preschoolers, and it goes up to 6th grade, and she runs a lot of programs there. I sat in on a reading, and I witnessed the glow in the children's eyes when she opened the book. And it was reminiscent to my days as a student at Roaringbrook School. And that's why I decided to key in on, because I can't say that I could pick any one teacher, because they were all great. But I picked the ones that I had because I didn't know the ones that you had. So I'm not saying my teachers were better than yours or anything like that. I just know these teachers, and I don't know the ones that you had. I'm stopping at 5th grade. That's it. That's as far as I can get. And my kindergarten teacher was Mrs. Valente, who taught us the concept of numbers and to read time. Well, I didn't know how to read. I already knew how to read time because my grandfather bought me Timex watch. I wound every night when I was 4 years old. So, but nonetheless, I'm not sure if I really knew how to read time, but By the time she finished with us, we really knew how to read time. And he also gave me a pocket knife, so I don't think you get away with going to school with one of those today. She taught us how to, she didn't teach us how to speak. She taught us how to cooperate and respect one another, because the first thing I thought of was, when you see other boys, you fight with them. Well, that wasn't happening in kindergarten. It happened when we did King of the Hill, but not at Roaring Brook School. There was a difference between the time when I went to school and the time my mom went to school, distinctly, because my mom started in 1940 when she was 9 years old, and when the first day she came to school, everybody was packed into the hallway, and she couldn't understand what they were doing, why they were going to class. Well, some gentleman walks in from the porte cochere, which was originally Greeley, 1 through 12, class 1 through 12, which is now Bell, and they sang "For He's a Jolly Good Fellow," and it was Robert Bell. Once that, it was a tradition, and everybody went to class. Everybody knew everyone. You didn't know, you all got together and you walked to school, entire families walked to school. So you didn't know just your best friend, you knew their brothers, their younger sisters, you knew everybody. Now when I went to school, it was Roaring Brook, Bell, and Greeley. So now we start with a different age, and it's even more confined today, of course, because as you know, with our kids, they know kids a year older or a year younger. They don't know entire families. They may eventually know entire families if they have best friends. So, we had Mrs. Valenti, who I called Mrs. Valentine. She took a great interest in the projects of the 3rd grade of Mr. Arthart, who had an ant farm, a glass-viewable beehive, and hatched chickadees. And we made many trips to the 3rd grade. Well, to make a long story even longer, Mrs. Hart eventually left teaching to raise a family with Mr. Hart. And I was contacted by Mrs. Valenti Hart many years later, when she was buying a property. It was 25 years later, and she was seeking some professional advice, and she heard I was a builder. 40 years later, she met my mother-in-law, Marge Cullen, in the library, and asked if I still possessed a great sense of humor. I can assure you I don't. My 1st grade teacher, Mrs. Sabio, was very special, Mrs. Lois Sabio.
Oh, she was great.
She connected with students. I remember vividly her drawing a big A, she was writing, excuse me, a big A on the green board, which was a blackboard, with this yellowish chalk, and looking at the class and scanning and saying, A, ah. And I was like, wow. Her eyes grabbed onto mine, and that was it. I was hooked. Next thing, we're running through, let me see. We plowed through the alphabet, vowels, consonants, syllables, and, here we go. Punctuation, prepositional phrases, sentence structure, and a love for reading. She also brought us in guest storytellers and introduced us to African American and Native American stories. We did nature walks, class trips. Mrs. Sayfield lived locally, and we would occasionally greet each other while passing through town. She wouldn't let you walk by her without saying hello. She made sure you stopped and you said hello. So, my 2nd grade teacher was Mrs. Aarons, who keyed on creative writing, short stories, and poetry. My 3rd grade became more challenging. Mrs. Gastrich, who I just saw at my mother-in-law's funeral, and she's been a friend of the family for many years. She worked with my mother-in-law at the West Orchard School, and also knew her from the library. She was all business. Boys at that age have a tendency to test the waters. Well, Mrs. Gastrich made it clear that we were there to learn. She was very astute and reviewed our work meticulously. It was clear that she felt responsible to educate, but it was also very clear that she was dedicated and loved her students. My 4th grade teacher was Mrs. Bell. She was a wonderful teacher, and she shared her experience traveling, which included third world countries. It made us feel privileged to be where we were, and she told us some really beautiful, heart-wrenching stories, and she was an inspirational spirit, but she left mid-year maternity leave, and the person who took over was Mrs. Haas. Mrs. Haas was a career substitute and tutor. So, and she was a tremendous woman, but she had it was a steep hill, you know, and here you have this charismatic Mrs. Bell, who had this long, beautiful black hair, and Mrs. Haas was an older woman, who, but she was a professional. And luckily for us, she was a math expert. And she honed it on our math skills. I remember she saw that some of us were good in math, and she just started going for it. So, but often overlooked, but never forgotten, were teachers who either visited the classroom or conducted extracurricular activities. One being the unknown teacher recess, where you were free to run and play, or just dress and catch a few rays. Some of the activities were co-ed kickball, merry-go-round, slide, jungle gym, general roughhousing, which is like keep away. Okay, and for the girls, it was skipping rope, hopscotch, patty cake, and I'm not sure what the sport was called, but it was picking up stars when you bounce the ball. I guess it was called stars, right?
Jacks.
What was it called? Jacks. That was it. Yes. Mrs. Knapp, who was an art teacher, taught my mom, and was totally engaged. Okay, and taught us how to work in different mediums, but really taught us to produce through self-motivation and let us use our imagination to draw. It was a start for many professionals, and I know firsthand because my sister Nancy Buetti, Nancy Lane named after, it should be Nancy Buetti Lane, but it's Nancy Lane on Mountain Peak, right? My father developed Chappaqua Mountain Peak, and parts of Cross Ridge. Is a professional artist, and I'm sure that Mrs. Knapp was instrumental in getting her started. Mrs. Collins taught co-ed gym class and threw the ball out, and one of her favorites was dodgeball. So co-ed dodgeball, and you figure, just figure it out. But she didn't, she taught us fair play and made us realize that sports were an organized sport, or organized event. The librarian now, very dear to my heart, Mrs. Brundage, also had my mom for a teacher. So, as you can figure, I'm almost done. As you can figure, I was treated like royalty. Well, just being a Buetti in town, you're treated like royalty. And of course, we treat all our friends like royalty. So that works out pretty well. She brought suspense to every page when she read to us. She single-handedly taught us the entire school, one class at a time, on how to access the collection and research collections using a Dewey Decimal System. Mr. Ross, who was a teacher at Roaring Brook, taught us how to read melodies and play in C major on the recorder, and which came in very handy in the later years when we took mandatory course program at Bell School with a demanding conductor, Joseph Visca. Morty Ross and I reconnected many years later when he needed to budget for the gazebo in Chappaqua, for which he received a Community Service Award from the Chappaqua Rotary Club. Subsequently, took musical lessons from him where he resided with Rita. Their son Brad is a composer and accomplished Broadway caliber pianist. The vote. We all voted in the elections. Stevens and Eisenhower, Nixon and Kennedy. The school was non-political. The teachers were non-political, but they allowed the students to be free thinkers, and there was always active discourse between students. There were tensions with Russia. We experienced the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 5th grade. Everything at school was kept cool, but we knew that there was a possibility that it could have gotten out of hand. I wish things were that simple today. Okay. The culmination of one teacher, one class was the 5th grade. We were going to get launched into Bell. Bell was scary, okay? So we were actually made to go to, the Grafton wasn't built yet, so we were made to go to take 5th grade at the Horse Greeley at the J building. So the man of the hour, the legend, is Mr. McGuire. Well, there was an unsaid competition between McGuire and Allard, the next teacher was next door. And this actually spurred unbridling of learning for all the students in those 2 classes. We, the McGuire class, we immediately were told that we had to that we'd been passed along. That those days are over, those easy days where they just pass you. And you will not pass this time. You will not pass the next grade if you do not perform. These were scare tactics, and they worked. Also, if you were disruptive, Mr. McGuire had a big ring in his finger, which he showed you with a fist of disdain and threat that he will clobber you if need be, and he did it to so-and-so, and they'll do it to you. Well, enough said. We let you fool around, but not too much. The ground rules were laid, and the very patriotic veteran demanded respect for the flag, our country, and for each other, especially for girls. Each student was immediately evaluated through rigorous testing, especially in reading. Each student was challenged to improve his or her position on the ladder to success. It didn't matter if you were the most or the least successful student. Everyone was challenged on their own level or expected to radically improve. We learned how to meet deadlines on long-term project, make outlines, research, compose term papers and reports, keep footnotes, record a bibliography, work in different mediums, but really taught us to produce through self-motivation and let our imagination, wait a second, sorry. Compose and organize pieces and periodicals and not plagiarize. Many achievements required unprecedented hours of work and relentless study to achieve the goal. There was an emphasis to follow directions. We now possess the tools to produce. When Mrs. Ellis of the 6th grade English and Mr. Casey of 7th grade English challenged us in middle school, we were confident we could meet any challenge. We had mastered the 5th grade math level curriculum in March. Mr. McGuire asked the class if they wanted to continue to forge ahead. The voluminous yes was unanimous. We pushed right through ratio equations and into elementary algebra, which gave us an upper hand when we were met with the challenges of the extraordinary 6th grade math teachers, Scott, and the 7th grade, Mrs. Scott, and the 7th grade, Mr. Frauenthal, who both recognized our strengths and built upon those strengths. Much of the work was done with study groups, and we collaborated with other students. On one assignment, to research a famous person and send a personal letter in regard to their main influence in life. Many wrote to the White House. I wrote and received a letter from the talented vaudevillian musical comedian Jimmy Durante. He advised me to surround myself with very positive people, and that a sense of humor is essential in life. This all happened with great sensitivity and humor and appreciation for each student's unique identity and means of expression. McGuire knew every student intimately and challenged each student vigorously. Adrian was an advocate for students, promoted and credited our accomplishments, even those who wrote with creativity and humor. Adrian McGuire lived in Pleasantville and took care of his mom, great care of his mom. He lived in his home. Until recently, in his mid-90s, decided to move into assisted living in North Salem. When my eldest son, Serafino, was now a teacher enlisted at Grafflin, in 2000, Adrian was still consulting there. He was passing by the room, and after nearly 40 years and 55 years in the school system, he immediately recognized me and interjected, "Serafino, we picked up where we left off." Mr. McGuire has been visited regularly all these years by a band of former students headed by my good friends, Gene Orsenigo and Bill Fisher. Adrian taught simultaneously at every level, recognized that this is Bill Fisher said. Adrian's Adrian taught simultaneously at every level and recognized each student's strengths and weaknesses and addressed each student individually while simultaneously addressing the group. In my recent conversation with Bill Fisher, Mr. McGuire is much like a great performer who sings to the entire audience but engages each person he sings to directly. Okay, that's it.
Our next speaker is Pete Zimmerman, who moved to Chappaqua in 1959, age about 12. Really graduate in 1971. Been deeply involved with the community all his life, particularly in local sports and local businesses. As you may remember, he ran Easy Sports for 23 years on South 30th Avenue. And he will talk today in particular about the local businesses. Pete, you're on.
Hold it close. Okay. I got the timer here, so I'm not going to go over. I'd like to start by informing everybody that Gray's daughter, Dar, who is a great singer-songwriter, will be performing at Terrytown Music Hall May 7th. I believe that's Saturday. So get your tickets soon because they're going to sell out. But I'll move on from there. Thank you, Gray. As he said, my family moved here in 1959 and embraced everything that is Chappaqua. I always believed that the strength of this community had a lot to do with the merchants in town. Like people have described, the merchants knew everybody. Anybody knew that they could use any merchant's phone at any time. And what made this so special was that all the merchants lived in town. And like many of the teachers who also lived in town. And I think that that had a lot to do with making this a great place to grow up and live. The first person I'd like to talk about is my mentor, and his name was Larry Casa. Larry Casa owned Squires for, I think, 40-something years. And not only did he run Squires, he ran the local youth football. He was very involved with the baseball program, and just an all-around great guy. And like Don DuPont, there seems to be a underlying musical background to a lot of people here. Larry had I call it jazz band. Everybody call it whatever you want. But he played drums and played at many events. I'd like to touch upon what Sandy said about his uncle, Dick Buetti, who opened Greeley Barbershop when he was 16. To me, that's just amazing. After basically doing an apprenticeship in Italy for 2 years. And the highlight that somebody told me a story of, I'm not sure if it was John or Rick, one of his sons, was that the football team won a big game against Katona in 1941, and Dick gave all the kids on the team free haircuts. So that was part of being in this community, that he did things not for the money, but because of the love of the town. And we had other great merchants. Richie Lang, who owns the litter store, he's been there for over 50 years. I saw him the other day. He's still cracking the same old joke. Okay, that, you know, we used to go there after church, 50 years ago, and he would be telling the same thing to my father. my father would be like, oh, what is with this guy? Next up is Joan Corwin. She ran Chappaqua Bus Company for over 50 years. She was very involved in a lot of other things about Chappaqua. She volunteered with the ambulance corps. She did so much for the kids in this town. She treated each kid that the bus company used as one of her kids. I thought that was pretty special. Eric Nicolason, I think he's a 1951 Greeley graduate. I think he's been in business. I think his father had this insurance agency before him. So that's 60, almost 65 years. It's pretty special. And then a friend of mine who just passed away recently was Harold Campbell, and another Greeley graduate, and he was basically the town surveyor for over 50 years. So these people all lived in town, and they always were giving. I'm going to mention one other person that probably nobody here knows about, but my best friend, one of my best friends from high school, wrote me a letter about his grandfather. His name was Jim Harrigan. He was one of the first fire chiefs in town in the 30s and 40s. He was also the postmaster, which was right next door to here, and he owned an oil delivery company. And this was during the Depression, and basically everybody in town owed him money. So Big Jim Harrigan, I think from the pictures I see, was 6'4", well over 300 pounds. And he started the Greeley Sports Boosters Club and held the first football dinner at the Kittle House in 1941. He would get the parents to come and park around Bell School, the field here, and turn their lights on so the team could practice an extra hour. So when they had this first annual football dinner in 1941, two days later was Pearl Harbor, and nothing was the same, ever. So, that's basically what I have to say. I hope I haven't taken too much time. I have to look at my clock here and see if I have any more time. Oh, time is up. Okay. Thank you for having me. And remember, get those Dara Williams tickets tomorrow.
Are you taking a cut at the door or something?
I've got to say that Dick Buetti gave me my first haircut, and I was scared because I had those scissors close to my head. But he was so reassuring and so friendly that I remember that as a very pleasant experience to this day. The other is that Jim Harrigan gave me my first job, delivering mail, Christmas vacations, three tours a day of 5 miles each. He was really hard on the feet. The next speaker, and finally, R.J. Impostato, really graduate in 1983, yes, who grew up across the street from me. And he will share memories of that distinctive neighborhood of Dodge Farm and Gray Rock Lane, where he grew up. R.J., it's yours.
Thank you, everyone. Before I begin, I just do want to thank the Executive Committee for the Historical Society for having me sit as a trustee along with the other distinguished trustees. I'm very pleased with that. So thank you. I look forward to the next 3 years.
Thank you.
This was an important speech for me. So starting about a week ago, I started putting it together, outlining and memories. And yesterday, I was working with Mrs. Williams at the Take It or Leave It shop, and she pulls me aside and says, "RJ," and she looks straight at me with those blue eyes. have I talked to you, RJ, about the things you cannot say tomorrow? And I said, no, we can go over it now, though. So she listed a couple things, and at the end, she says, RJ, perhaps what's most important, don't say anything embarrassing. Now understand, I grew up with Mrs. Williams my entire life, so she knows me, which is probably why she said that. So I looked at her and said, Mrs. Williams, I have to rewrite my whole speech. So the speech you're hearing now is not the speech that I was going to give. My background is I'm 57 years old. I moved to Chappaqua from New York City in 1972. It was the age of 8. Young age, but it was good age. It's not lost on me that today I was the youngest of the speakers and last, so it was wonderful to see the different decades, how Chappaqua grew up and changed, but not too much, not too much. I moved from New York City to 27 Garrett Lane, as Mr. Williams said. I was fondly his neighbor. For those who don't know where Grey Rock Lane is, it's right off of Route 120 by Dodge Farm, which is kind of central to the rest of what I'm going to talk about. I was very fortunate because the Williams had 3 beautiful daughters. It's a cul-de-sac, 8 houses, quiet. It was everything New York City was not. Not surprising, there was big differences between New York City and Chappaqua. Gone were the New York City tall buildings that reached into the sky, and those were replaced with trees just waiting to be climbed. Gone were the New York City avenues and the paved streets and the hustle and bustle of people, and that was replaced with green grass, just waiting to be run on and rolled on, and later in life I had to cut their lawn by me mowing it. Gone were the street vendors. They were replaced with deer and birds and squirrels and chipmunks, lots of chipmunks. Gone were my parents' rules in New York City. Don't leave the apartment without mom or dad. That was replaced with go anywhere you want. Just stay, don't leave Grey Rock Lane, and be home for dinner. And gone was the door key to my New York City apartment. That wasn't needed because my new house in Chappaqua didn't have a lock. Well, all this does sound like the fictitious town of Mayberry on the TV show Andy Griffith, and if you're thinking that, you'd be right. That's what it felt like. Well, I do have a lifetime of stories to tell. I'm also very aware Mrs. Williams in the front row has the sign that reads 1 minute to go, and she's not afraid to use it, as we've seen this afternoon. I do have one story to tell. Gives you a glimpse of Chappaqua during that era. It was Halloween. And I found that Halloween was very different in Chappaqua than it was in New York City. Similar, but different. Leading up to Halloween, I was 8 years old, and leading up to it, it was early October, and the dads in Chappaqua on Grey Rock Lane got very excited about Halloween, which didn't make any sense to me. It's a kid's holiday. So I just went along with the road, with the plan. So the day of Halloween, kids got dressed, their favorite costumes. Dads, just the dads for some reason, not the moms. Dads went ahead, got together at the local house, and we had all of Grey Rock Lane and Dodge Farm to walk around, which is terrific. Turns out that when we got to our first house, instead of getting the candy and leaving, everyone went into the house. Everyone, the dads and the kids, which is very odd to me. I just used to take the candy and go to the next place, next apartment. So the kids would play and the dads would have a drink. I said, okay, this is the way it is here in Chappaqua. And then this happened in the second house and third house and fourth house. And it was weird because I was 8 years old and I said, how could the dads be so thirsty they needed a drink at each house? Didn't make any sense to me. So we moved on. It was very odd. As I got on, as the night went on, it turned out that I started to understand that the kids, the adults, the fathers, had a hard time. They were laughing at everything. Things that were silly. And at 8 years old, it still didn't make any sense to me. Finally, as the night really wore on and our bags were filled with candy, the kids would say, all right, can we go home now? Our bags are filled. And the dads would always say the same thing, which is, kids, just one more house. Just one more house. Much later in life, I learned the dads, just the dads, had a code name for Halloween night, and it was on Grey Rock Lane. They called it Trick and Drink. I only found out about that a couple years ago, not when I was 8. So, people say you can't go back in time. For those who are fortunate among us to have lived here in the childhood and adulthood in Chappaqua, I would suggest it's simply not true. Thank you very much.
That concludes the formal program, but if you have questions or comments, now is your chance. There is a reception then across the way. We were hoping that we'd be able to go on the patio tonight, but it's kind of chilly. And I think it's going to be much pleasanter in the next room, the original Chappaqua Library. Thank you all for coming.